Hello, friends and enemies, heroes and villains. Welcome to Epic Realms. Tonight's guest is an award winning audiobook narrator, voice actor, and writer, best known as Darkseid from Zack Snyders Justice League, but also has been on shows such as Monk, The Runaways, Almost Famous, Argo, even Murphy Brown, and more. Please welcome Ray Porter to Epic Realms. How you doing?
Good. How are you? Happy to be here.
Awesome, awesome. I have a question for you. Was
Okay.
acting something you always wanted to do growing up?
Um, it was kind of the family business. My
Okay.
my grand my grandfather was in the business, my mother was in the business, so I always just kind of grew up around it. And 17, 18 years old, you're in high school, and it seems like every single person in the world is like, so what are you gonna do? And I really wasn't sure, but I didn't think I didn't want to be an actor. I wanted to do something else. And then I went and saw a play, a production of Heartbreak House by George Bernard Shaw, and I walked out of the theater and was like, "Yeah, okay, I'd like to do this." So I set my sights on that. Went to school for it and everything. So I have a
And
certified degree. I can act. It says I can. Paper. The other room. It says I can.
when you eventually ended up going into the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, is that
Oregon
correct?
Shakespeare Festival. Yeah, I was there from 1990 until 2018. Or 2008, sorry. I was there from 90 until 2008. And then back and forth between LA and there, like in the off season. That was when I did Murphy Brown a billion years ago.
Yeah.
And so I would come down to LA in the off season and kind of book whatever I could, that sort of thing. But I really enjoyed it up there. It's a beautiful place to live, and you get to do Shakespeare all day.
Right.
Heaven.
You a big
So
fan of Shakespeare?
Yeah, very much so. I love it. And it's funny because, on the West Coast of America, uh, the argument for doing Shakespeare and why is it still relevant and why does it matter and all of that. Those are great questions to ask. They should be asked, I think, of everything. Um, but seeing a production that is properly done with directors who know what they're doing and actors who know what they're doing, um, where the writing is allowed to complete its path from Shakespeare to the audience, uh, you don't have those questions anymore. You understand why it matters. And it was really gratifying to see that light come on for a lot of people who were dragged into the theater,
Right.
or maybe just, bought their own tickets and were like, I'm going to get some culture, even if it hurts. And they would come and sit and found themselves. So many people would come up to me over the years that were surprised that they enjoyed it. And I'm like, well, why did you buy a ticket for it if you didn't think you would? Okay, that's your deal. But they came out actually liking it. And
Yeah.
that was really gratifying, you know, because it does matter.
Was there a moment growing up, because everybody goes in and sometimes it's the whole, oh my gosh, I'm doing this and I've got a show and I've got to go on stage and I'm going to forget my lines. Is there a point at which it just clicks for you where you're just like, I can do this, I'm in?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it has to do with, the great thing about Shakespeare, especially, is that once you're sort of familiar with it, because, yeah, it's unfamiliar. He places words in weird places in sentences and things like that. And there's a sort of a vernacular, that they were saying in the 1600s in England that are a little different than now. Um, but once you sort of get your ear familiar with that, it's the easiest thing in the world to do. There is no real subtext. There's no like, well, what does he really mean? He tells you what he means
Yeah.
in the lines. It's all just there. Honestly, all you have to do is shut up and get out of the way and allow Shakespeare to deliver the message, and so in that respect, it's kind of feels like cheating, where
Yeah.
people are like, oh my goodness, you're so brilliant. It's like, well, I'm really not. Shakespeare is, but here, you know. And so just kind of perfecting the craft of delivering that was really important. And yeah, I got to a place where I sort of felt confident about it, and then did another play and realized I knew nothing, and then sort of got on top of that and felt sort of confident, and then did another play and realized I knew nothing. And it's the constant evolution. I think for anybody, you should never stop learning,
Yeah.
but particularly for an actor, I think anytime an actor is like, oh yeah, no, I got this locked. it's not going to be as good as going on that journey of discovery with the audience. So
Was it a big change to go from doing stage acting to, you said you went back and forth to LA and then you're
yeah.
like doing TV shows. Is there a big
Well, there's
change?
still, I mean,
Because,
sure, there's technique stuff that's a little different acting for the camera, and I still grapple with it. Um, and I hate watching myself, so I'll see something I'm in, and I'm like, oh God, oh God. Um, it's different. You also don't get the kind of immediate feedback that you would with an audience. Um, but the difference between having to communicate these emotions or these really deep human things to somebody who paid good money to sit in the last row of a 1,200 seat outdoor theater, and they
yeah,
deserve to get as much of the show as the person in row A does. So you have to try to deliver that in a way that they get it. That calls for some technical stuff that you don't necessarily have to employ on the camera, where
right.
so much is right there and informed, and then the editor can have a lot of control over what the moments of a scene are and that sort of thing. So very different.
Yeah,
But
you had mentioned in another show that there have been times where they're just like, don't act. Don't act.
well, yeah, honestly, I mean, the less that you put on it, but I was kind of experimenting with that a little bit, even doing live theater, just how little can I do here,
Right.
deliver just enough that's necessary. You don't have to like fling yourself all over the place, you know, saw the air with your hand, as Hamlet says.
Did you do a lot
Um,
with improv and stuff as well?
Fair amount. Yeah. I studied with the groundlings a
Oh,
bit,
nice.
and, yeah, that sort of immediacy and the willingness to go there. The gray area, the value of the gray area, where you're not entirely certain what everything is, and you just kind of commit anyway. And
Yeah.
there's some wonderful things that can evolve from that.
For those that are listening that don't know what the groundlings are, because it's like so many people have gone through them, and that's
Oh
like
yeah,
that's a badge of honor to spend, even if you
yeah, and I
spend
never.
one day with them.
Yeah, no, I took 2 years with them, and then family stuff kind of precluded me continuing. But it is, it's just sort of a level program, and there's different levels, and then ultimately, if you get into the actual groundlings company, you can say you're a groundling.
Hmm.
I won't say that because there's far too many people that are geniuses that I respect that are groundlings.
Yeah,
But I did study with them a bit, and my God, it was informative.
nice. That's amazing.
Hmm.
Did you take some of that with you going into doing audiobook narrations and voice work?
Oh, sure. I mean, I think any information you pick up as an actor, you're going to use someplace else. Um, the willingness to commit, being kind of unafraid, that sort of thing.
Hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. And in LA, also, sometimes you'll be sent a script or handed a script for an audition, and you don't have a lot of time to like put a bunch of stuff on it. So really, the only other alternative is to simply tell the truth and figure out what the truth is and then say it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So,
I'm
so
sorry if I'm making acting sound like basic plumbing, but ultimately
no,
that's kind of
no,
what
but
it
that's
is.
that's amazing, and it's
You
a
know,
lot of fun to listen to. And people that are listening, like they don't necessarily always get that insight. You'll get the behind the scenes of a movie or your, on a
sure.
DVD set, and that's all they'll get. They don't really get the minutia of stuff like that. They don't understand what some of that stuff means and how much it means to someone such as yourself going in there.
Well, a lot of actors, and particularly theater actors, there's a lot of attention paid to the craft of doing it. Um, and at some point, you realize that um, simplicity is probably the best thing to do. Just get on with it, get the job done. There's all those great old nuggets about, some great actor saying, just say your lines when you're supposed to, leave when you're supposed to, and don't bump into the furniture. And, it's a great anecdote. I don't know if anybody ever actually said it. It may be an urban myth, but when it comes right down to it, that's kind of the job,
Yeah.
really. We're not doing rocket surgery out there. We're telling a story. And in point of fact, I like to remove it even further. And, I don't call myself an artist. Um, I really focus on the craft of it because I believe that, like the author, if I'm narrating an audiobook, or the playwright or the screenwriter, has created a work of art. And if I deliver it to the best of my ability, the audience member is going to kind of create a work of art in their own head. Do you know?
Yeah.
You ever read a book and you imagine it a certain way, and then you go see the movie and you're like, that is not what I saw in my head
Right.
at all. Well, it's because that was created in somebody else's head,
Yeah.
you know? And I love that. I love the fact that you can be in front of 1,200 people and there's 1,200 different pieces of art being created.
Yeah.
Just if you are doing your job. That's amazing.
It is. It
Yeah.
is. When you're going through and you're doing something like an audiobook as compared to stage work or movie
Mm-hmm.
work, what is the big difference between doing like voice acting and acting? Would you say that there is a difference, or would you say that it's the same thing?
Voice actors are actors first and foremost.
Mm-hmm.
People put up this sort of imaginary yellow line between the two, and they just aren't. Some of the best actors I've ever known, ever, make most of their money voice acting. You don't know their faces on the street, and
Yeah.
they're some of the most genius actors you'll ever meet in your life. Um, Obviously, voice acting, there's some slightly different techniques you might employ. I mean, with the thing with audiobooks, it's not social. That's one thing. You're on your own. And
Yeah.
if you're doing all the characters, you're playing scenes with yourself. And I sit in here in this sort of blanket fort and just try to tell the story. And so, play all the roles and do all the characters and all of that. And I do get, this sounds really lame, but I do get kind of lonely, and I never realized it until I was in the studio in London doing Sandman with all of these brilliant actors, and we were all in the room together creating something.
Oh,
And
really?
there's a certain kind of alchemy, a certain kind of magic with that you just don't have when you're on your own,
Yeah.
you know. And there's the whole thing of like, you know, the scene's going really well and it's terrific and you're doing really great, and then a helicopter flies over and you have to stop.
Yeah.
Whatever. So yeah, and people are misled by audiobook narration. I know I certainly was when I started. I've had so many people come up to me and they're like, well, I've got a good voice and I like to read, so I think I could be an audiobook narrator. And it's like, bon voyage.
Good
Have a
luck.
nice time. It's deceptively difficult. Uh, you get to the end of the day and your brain is mush, your voice is hashed, all these muscles are just destroyed, and the last thing you want to do is talk to anybody.
Yeah.
So there are real challenges to doing an audiobook for sure.
Do
That
you have
you
some sort of preparation that you go through ahead of time where you're like,
somewhat.
I'm going to spend the next 12 hours reading. I've got to, gargle
No, I
with
don't.
mineral water or
Right, right.
take a shot of whiskey, whatever.
Yeah, no, exactly. Hey, shot of whiskey is not a terrible idea sometimes, but no, I've got this throat spray that seems to work okay. I mean, it tastes a lot like licking a wooden movie theater floor, but taste aside, it's basically okay. Water somewhat. Um, Getting up every I try to get up every 30 minutes. Like I'll finish 30 minutes of recording and get up and walk around, because you can end up just sat here in this chair for hours on end, which is not good for you.
Yeah.
Um, I don't do a heck of a lot of pre-preparation with a book. I found, just for me, this isn't true for any other narrators, and I'm not saying anybody else should do this, but I tried at one point. I had about, I don't know, 6 or 7 books under my belt. And I started kind of looking around and went, well, I should get a handle on this. I should study other narrators, and I should try to like approximate what they sound like, and fit, right? So I tried that. And I did a ton of research and I listened to a bunch of really impressive, very talented narrators and really tried to kind of model them. And I pre-read the thing and I marked it all out. And I recorded a book, and it's one of the worst reviewed books that I've ever done.
Oh, wow.
Um, because it was dry and it was dusty and it wasn't me. It
Yeah.
wasn't immediate. It wasn't happening for the audience member.
Yeah.
In in the text. And so I found for me that if I can have some of that immediacy in reading it, then so will the person who bought the audiobook.
Yeah.
So that's what I do. And
Perfect.
I don't worry about trying to sound like anybody else. I just try to sound like me, and that's the advice I give now when people ask, like, I'm narrating. What do you think I should do? And I'm like, just do you. Just talk like you do. Tell the story like you do. And the book will be served, and the listeners will. It'll be justification for the money that they spent
Right.
if you're bringing your best self to
Well,
it.
because
So
they can't be you. You're already you. They can't be a they
true.
can't be a
There
Luke
is that.
Daniels because there already is a Luke Daniels.
Yeah, and I mean, you could try to be like Luke Daniels, and you would fail horribly because nobody's better at being Luke Daniels than Luke Daniels.
Have you listened to any of Luke's stuff?
Yeah, he's a brilliant narrator.
I want to let you know, and I don't know if you know this. We had him on the show, and
Oh,
we asked him who his inspirations were,
yeah.
and he goes Ray Porter.
Come on.
No joke. You can go
That's
back and
amazing.
listen to the episode. Ray Porter
That's
was one of
amazing.
his biggest inspirations in
That's
audiobook
wonderful.
narration.
That's wonderful. It's really gratifying to hear. He's a terrific narrator. He really is.
Yeah.
I remember the first time I heard him, I was like, damn, I better up my game. Yeah.
So yeah, I didn't plan to
Thank you
mention
for
that, but
telling
it's
me
like
that.
we've
That's
had him on
lovely.
there, and he's such a great guy. Says like, well,
Such a good guy. Yeah.
talking about. Is there anybody else that you still listen to with other audiobook
Yeah,
narrators just for
I
yourself?
do a little bit. And I mean, I've become really good friends with several narrators. And so in a weird way, it's kind of odd listening to them because I'm like, know them. I was just listening to you talk while we were having a whiskey, and now I'm listening to you do this, but it's strange. Um, but it's always good to bend your ear and just listen to like what people are doing and stuff like that. But like Scott Brick is one of my dearest friends. Simon Vance is one of my dearest friends. There's several narrators that I just adore as people and
Yeah.
as narrators. And I look at their talent and I look at their skill and think, oh man, I can't even touch that. That's brilliant. And I love that. I love that kind of attitude. And ideally, that's what you want is a sort of a collegial thing where we rise together,
Yeah.
You're not immediately struck talentless by acknowledging the talent of somebody else. And I have found over the course of my career that the kind of people who sort of try to hold on to their stuff and at the expense of others, they don't last.
Yeah. High
I'd
tides
much
rise all
rather.
boats.
It is an old cliche. Sorry, my voice is hatched.
That's all right.
Uh,
You've been reading all day long. It's totally
yes, I have.
understandable.
It is an old cliche, but it's an old cliche for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
It's a much more congenial environment. Certainly, it's a lot easier to hang out with these people, but it's also really inspiring to have somebody be your friend and then marvel at how brilliant they are. It just feels good to tell somebody that they did good work, you know. So I'm very free with, people ask me a lot of times to like list narrators I like, and it's like we could be here for an hour and a half, and
Right.
it would be like the phone book.
Yeah.
There are so many narrators out there right now, so many of them I'm fortunate enough to know, and I admire all their work, you know.
Well, it's
So,
such a growing industry too. Like there's
oh my
always new
God, yes,
books,
it
and
is.
everybody wants to get their book
Yes,
narrated. And
yeah, it's been like that for the last few years, kind of like the Wild West.
right.
Something happened where the sales just increased and shot through the roof, and it's a thing now.
Yeah. Yeah.
So now they'll get celebrity narrators in, and that sort of thing. um I had occasion to do a play with somebody who is very, very famous, and he had been asked to narrate a book. He was like, "Oh God, I was just destroyed after the first day. I don't know, how many have you done?" And I was like, "A little over 400." And his eyes crossed. He was like, "How? What? Why? What are you doing?" He just couldn't understand why
Yeah.
you would subject yourself to that abuse.
Right.
So yeah.
Do you have to deal with a lot of like directing as far as you're doing audiobook narrations and stuff, or is it kind
Sometimes.
of at the point now where post pandemic they're just like, here's the stuff, do your work, and we'll go from there.
Sometimes, there's sometimes where either a producer would like to be more hands-on or the author would like to be more hands-on, and I'll hear that, from them, and I always like to have input from authors. But the author does one thing, I do something else completely different, and their readers and their listeners do something completely different.
Right.
And you can't try to have control over all of those elements. So there's a lot of authors that'll give me a little bit of information and then let me go, and then I'll hear from them after, and they're like, wow, I was really surprised by this one thing that you did. I never thought of it that way, but it works. And then listeners will come back, because audiobook listeners have a tremendous sense of ownership.
Right.
And they should, so you'll see those reviews on Audible and that sort of thing, and people really are like in depth. um and they'll respond to stuff, and myself and the author will be like, what? Wow, you got that? Okay.
Yeah.
And that to me is proof of, like I said before, the audience creating their own work of art.
Right.
So you gotta once you put it out there, it isn't yours anymore.
Right.
You gotta let it go.
When you've got to cover so many different characters and character
Yes.
voices and things like that, that it's ridiculous. We were talking off podcast a little bit
Yeah.
about your take on males doing female voices, and I thought that you had such an amazing look at that. And I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, but like a point of view as far as that goes. You want to talk about that a little bit?
A little bit. I mean, I fell into the trap like a lot of people do, where it's like you feel like you've got to like put a bunch of stuff on it if you're doing, let's say, a female voice. And then you start actually listening to the way people talk and realize that there are women with voices that are incredibly low, lower than me, lower than yours. There are different ways of speaking. People are unique and different. And it's a challenge. It's a challenge for the person who's narrating the book. It's also a little bit of a challenge for the listener. They have to willingly suspend their disbelief
Right.
and just accept. There are a few narrators that I know that I think are absolute masters at it.
Yeah.
I ain't one of them. I'm doing my best.
Right.
But I found it enormously freeing to recognize that it's less about tone or pitch and more about intent, more about, just playing the scene. And, yeah, sure, it'll employ maybe a bit more air
Hmm.
behind my voice, but that's a character choice for a lot of different characters that I
Right.
do. I don't think in terms of necessarily pitch. Yes, a lot of women's voices will be pitched a bit higher than a man's, just sort of in general
Yeah.
conversation, but that changes as well. So I think, in order to be a good narrator, you probably should be a really good listener, and I'm only just figuring that out now.
Yeah.
you know
Do you worry a lot about like your mouth shape or your facial expressions when you're doing different voices?
I don't think about my facial expressions, and I don't think, I mean, if you want to see me screw up, is the instant I start thinking about how I sound is when I'm going to screw up and I'm going to have to go back and re-record it.
Oh, okay.
The minute that I get that 5-pound eye hovering above me watching my performance, I'm no longer actually delivering the goods. I'm just scrutinizing myself, and who the hell wants to pay for that? So that's when I'll make a big mistake typically and have to go back and re-record. So I don't think about it.
Okay.
I move around a lot, which you shouldn't do, especially on a microphone like this, which is such a strict axis, but I move around a lot. And yeah, I don't think about necessarily facial expression or whatever. It's really just about playing the scene. Now, as far as mouth shape, um, you can accomplish a hell of a lot by putting your tongue in a slightly different place in your mouth when you're saying a certain line, or sending the sound out, to the sides, or having in your mind like either the voice is coming out of here or here or here, or.
Hmm.
But that's just technique stuff. But nobody sounds like anybody else.
Right.
That's why there's such a thing as voice print, you know. and everybody has different articulators. Everybody has, yeah, we all got a jaw. Most of us have a jaw. Most of us have teeth. Most of us have a tongue. um, how we move those things around in order to make sound that everybody agrees upon as language is unique. And so you can do a great deal, you can accomplish a lot vocally in narration by just shifting where it is a little bit, because
Yeah.
otherwise it just sounds like different pitched or different accented variations of yourself.
Yeah.
And if you're trying to like do a different character or something like that. And I know a lot of narrators don't do characters at all.
Yeah. They just
That's
talk.
their choice, and it seems to work for them pretty well. Um, I choose to go the other way. I mean, I'm not trying to make it like the Muppet Show, but I do want to give the listener an indicator of who is speaking. So yeah, I'll say things differently, I'll experiment with like different, sounds and that sort of thing.
Do you have a voice that was very difficult for you to take on that you tried to do
Oh,
that you
a
can think
lot.
of?
There's been a lot. I mean, there's been several. I mean, I made a big mistake early in my career. There was this like I was doing a fantasy novel, and there was this ancient elemental demonic thing, you know, and I did this like really gravelly, nasty, raspy voice at the beginning. Well, that's fine, except that it's a 400-page book that this character shows up in a lot.
Yeah.
And by the end of it, I mean, I nearly did myself an injury
Oh wow.
doing that. So you have to make vocal choices that are sustainable. That's a whole other thing. It's like, yeah, this sounds great right now. Is it going to sound good? And page 250, you know,
Yeah.
and are you going to be able to do the other characters in the story
Yeah.
and tell the story? So you have to think about things like that too.
Do you find a that you have a niche when it comes to certain audiobooks you do, or are you just like they're like here's we're assigning you these books, or is it like I want to do mostly these military realistic
No.
books
It's,
or
that just kind of happened. Military thrillers and sci-fi. It's been a lot. Most of the books I've done recently have been kind of in those genres. Some fantasy, which I'm very happy about. And I believe me, I'm not bitching. I've been very fortunate. I've
yeah.
had some really diverse stuff, but um, I imagine at this point that if a publisher is given a romance novel, they're probably not going to be thinking about me.
Yeah.
Um, and that's I mean, publishers are going to go with like, well, he can do that, so send him that book.
Right.
So yeah, I tend to do those sorts of things, and it's fun because I do enjoy those genres quite a lot. Would I like to do some literary giant thing? Well, of course I would. Love to have a go at something like that. Umberto Eco is my favorite author of all time. Love to narrate one of his things.
Okay.
Um, but I also love Stephen King. I also love Joe Hill. I love a lot of the authors who I'm fortunate enough to narrate. I would read them on my own. I love Neil Gaiman,
Yeah.
you know, um, and it's great. It's really fun to narrate those and tell those stories.
Are you the kind of person that still reads outside of
Oh
work
yeah,
for yourself?
yeah, absolutely. I was always kind of a voracious reader anyway. Like early on in my life, I would read before bed, and now it's very hard for me to get to sleep without having read something. And so even after a whole day of recording, I will still, sit and read a book that I've chosen because it's a different part of the brain.
Yeah. Yeah. You're
You
working
know?
different muscles there,
Yes,
and one's
exactly.
for you and one's for other people, right?
Well, there is that too. Yeah, I mean, exactly, exactly. I don't care how I deliver the book to me,
Right.
I do have to have some authority and control on like how I deliver it to somebody who paid good money to have me tell them a story.
Is there
So,
something you're reading right now,
um,
or a recent book you've
I
read?
yeah, no. I'm actually currently well, I'm going through Neil Gaiman's short stories, which I absolutely adore. Um Kind of rereading an Umberto Eco title just because I love him.
Okay.
Going back and visiting some of the stuff that I haven't read from Italo Calvino. Um Life is just the downtime between Stephen King books. I can't wait for another one of those to come.
Right.
Um, I've always got a bunch of different books going. So,
Okay.
yeah.
When you're doing different things, um, such as acting and
Mhm.
audiobook narration, is there a point at which you're like, I need to take a break, like an extended vacation? Or are you just like, I love doing this, I'm just going to keep going because I love doing it?
I love doing it, but I also do have to take a break every once in a while. I do. And, every book is different. People ask me, how long does it take to narrate a book? And I'm like, that's so much up to the book.
Right.
The book will take as long as it needs. Um, there are some books that, you flat like, I mean, Project Hail Mary was done before I was ready for it to be done as far as recording it. That's because that's the way that book was written. And so it
Right.
just flew through it. Um, my friend Jonathan Mayberry writes books and they end and I'm like, wait, I'm not quite ready. I'm done recording them. And I'm like, but there's more, right? Um, you know, I'm very fortunate that I get to narrate Jonathan Mayberry's books. I'm
Yeah.
very fortunate to call him a friend. Um, Jack Carr is another person who I admire greatly, and that sort of thing. Those books tend to kind of fly. There are other books that I've done that don't, and they need as much time as they need.
Yeah.
And so, you end up exhausted at the end of the day, and you've really not covered a lot of pages necessarily,
Yeah.
because that's how long that book wants for it to be told. So it's tough, and I wish I could say that literally every book I've ever done has been just, but that's not true. And I've been given some books to narrate that I personally did not care for. Doesn't matter. That's irrelevant. My opinion of it is completely irrelevant because
Yeah.
I'm not paying money to hear it. So I have to do my absolute best job with it. A little harder than, narrating a book that you just love.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's funny. It's like it's a job and then it's kind of not, and it's very pleasurable. And then there are days where you're like, oh my God, no, I can't, you know.
Do you have the freedom to, take a day off, or is it like I've got a schedule,
sometimes,
I fill out the
sometimes.
schedule?
I mean, I really do try to adhere to a schedule. My problem is, and I suck at scheduling and I say yes to pretty much everything. I still have that like young actor thing of like, if I say no to this, I'll never work again, and so I just, yes, I'll do that. Of course I'll do that. And then you end up overbooked and
Yeah.
you're juggling and you're doing that, which is not a great way to run a railroad, but I only look like an adult. I'm just not.
I hear you
Um,
there.
yeah, I'm just a large child with bills. Um, so yeah, I mean, if I'm like hammering like I am right now, I've got, books that need done. And so I'm like really slamming on it. There are others where you have a little bit of wiggle room where you're just like, okay, today I'm not going to talk. I'm not going to read anything. I'm not going to do, any of that. You have to do that. Especially when you're talking about sustaining telling a story over days and in some cases weeks of narrating a book. You need to be bringing your best, and if the battery's empty, the battery's empty.
Yeah.
So it's important to recharge.
Do you find it easy to remember some of the books you did? Like if somebody comes back and says, "Hey, can you do the next expansion of this book that you haven't touched in 10 years?" Would you be like, "Oh yeah, I remember that one," or do you have to go back and look it
Some
up?
I do, some I do, but typically I'll have to go back and kind of give it a listen just to make sure that there's continuity with the characters that I did to the best that I can. The other factor is that, like, if you're talking about a 10-year gap, well, my voice is different than it was 10 years
Right.
ago. Um, Sometimes it's different day to day. So that's, you try to get as close as you possibly can. I know some narrators who will actually keep vocal samples of every character that they do. They have a database.
Oh wow.
Yeah, I mean, my God, I don't know where my socks are. How are you that organized? Um, so, a lot of, and some of it I just remember. There's certain characters that I see their faces in my head and I know exactly what they sound like, and I just remember it. But yeah, that's a bit of a challenge sometimes.
Makes sense. So
Yeah.
let's shift gears a little bit and talk about
Okay.
shows and stuff you've been on. I'm
Hmm.
going to start off just because I'm really curious. You
Yeah,
portrayed a character in the TV series Monk,
I did.
and you filled
Yes.
in, like there were other actors that played that role before.
Three
What
different, three
what was
different
it?
actors.
What was
Yeah.
it like stepping in for the likes of a Tim Curry and filling in a role like that?
Yeah, well, that was weird. I never expected to get that job, honestly.
Hmm.
I went back and I looked at what Adam Arkin did because he was the first one to play Dale the Whale, and then it was Tim Curry.
Yeah,
And basically, I just went, okay, I'm gonna kind of take both. I'm gonna take from both, what because their performances were very
very
different. I'm gonna
different.
take from kind of both, and do that because a part of it was, I guess, a little bit of an inferiority complex when you're talking about Tim Curry and Adam Arkin.
Yeah.
It's like, no, now I'm going to put my stamp on it, and it's like, no, I'm going to continue their vision of the
Right.
character. And in fact, there was one of the producers who said to me that the reason why I got the job was that I brought their influences
That's
into that
awesome.
character. Um, and then I worked with Adam Arkin, directed me in Justified.
Oh, okay.
And so, yeah, so I got to tell him about, doing Monk and like basically taking from him and watching, what he did and that sort of thing. It was kind of cool.
That's nice. And what
Yeah.
what was his response? Do you
Oh,
remember?
he's great. He was just like, oh, that's terrific. He's a very unassuming person. He's like, oh, cool. Yeah. Tim Curry did it too. He did real different. I said, yeah, I kind of tried to sort of make both, mix it up. And then he was like, oh, how was it received? I said, well, I went on a couple of fan forums. He's like, don't ever do that. I said, yeah, wish you'd told me that before I did. Um, that's okay though.
Well, I
Uh,
thought it was great. Like my wife's a big fan of the Monk series, and
oh yeah. Oh,
and
that was a crazy time. I had to go into makeup at 3 o'clock in the morning.
I was going to ask
I did.
about that.
Yeah, I did 6 hours of makeup for that, and 5, 6 hours. So I come out and they had made arms that went all the way up to the shoulders, and that was over this like massive fat suit that you didn't see, and then the makeup device basically hung off of my cheeks and formed this giant bib, so it was like airtight. It was like a spacesuit,
Wow.
and um it was LA. It's a bit warm.
Yeah.
We're shooting through the day and we break for
And you've
lunch.
got lights and stuff too.
Oh yeah, and I'm wearing pajamas, many layers of pajamas, and all of this. So it comes time for lunch, and one of the PAs was like, "Hey, let me help you. Let me unzip you there so you can cool off a bit." They unzipped it, and this like miasma of heat came off, and they were like, "Oh my god, oh!" So that was when they went, "You need ice packs under your fat suit." I'm like, "Okay, I'll take them, sure." So they basically filled Ziploc bags with ice from craft
Wow.
services and stuffed them in various places on my fat suit, which all melted shortly, except for one bag of ice that somehow, in the course of the scene, the last scene that I do with Tony Shalhoub, had slid. How do I say this? Slid down,
Migrated.
migrated south. So there's a certain intensity to that last scene because um, rather sensitive parts are literally resting on a bag of ice.
Oh,
So the rest of me is as hot as a dying sun. Just that one spot was like sub-zero. So it was very surreal.
wow.
The glamour of Hollywood.
Yeah. What were some of
Uh,
your other favorite shows or movies that you did?
well, I just did an episode of 911 that was incredible fun to do. I really enjoyed doing that. I'd have to say possibly my favorite experience, with the exception of Justice League, because working with Zack Snyder is amazing and incredible in every way. Doing Almost Famous was unbelievable.
Okay.
Cameron Crowe is such an amazing director. He's such a good guy. It was telling that story And, you know, it was like 4 months. It was how I spent a summer, was hanging out with a bunch of people who all liked each other, and we would play guitars all day and laugh, and sometimes they would turn a camera on us. And, you know, it was a journey into, an era of music that I love, and it was just heavenly.
Nice.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that's great to hear. I
Yeah.
know we're a little short on time because
Oh, no.
you've got to get going
Yes.
there. So
I am a
I don't.
hockey dad.
I'd
I
love
have
to
to go to
talk about
hockey
all of the
practice.
things. So I was
Well,
like, well, I'll just give
maybe
you a
I'll come
couple
back
choices.
sometime. Yeah,
Yeah,
I'll come back sometime and we'll really like hash stuff if you
yeah,
want. I'd
yeah,
also
definitely.
love to do questions at some point. I know we may not have time for that today, but I'd love to come back at some point
Yeah,
in case
we'll
people have
definitely do
questions.
that. Um, you do have some upcoming appearance. You're going to Dubai.
Yeah. I'm going to Dubai. Yes. Speedy Comics in Dubai is hosting PopCon at the Dubai Expo in November. So I will be there along with a lot of other really, really cool people. And it's a con. So it should be really, really fun.
Awesome, that's cool.
So come to the Emirates in November.
Nice.
Yes.
You got some new books coming out too.
Yeah.
Audiobooks. You've got
Yes. Many.
well, your newest book just came out not too long ago. Is called Roadkill. A
Roadkill,
lot of
Dennis.
people. You've got a fan site on Facebook, and they were just going buck wild about how much they love Roadkill.
It
Uh,
was such a good book. It
tell
was
us
so
about
fun. I
that.
love Dennis Taylor. I love reading his stuff. I do. I mean, the Bobiverse, obviously, you know, the first time I read his work, and I was like, oh my God, this is great. And he had been fortunate enough to have been asked to do many of his other titles, and I love him. And yeah, I really enjoyed doing Roadkill. It was really fun.
What's kind of the premise of that one,
It's hard to talk about it too much without giving
or the series?
anything away. Well, Roadkill is a standalone,
Oh,
and
okay.
yeah, it's a standalone. And it's basically friends who, how do I say this without, yeah, it's a group of friends and something rather incredible and extraterrestrial occurs.
Okay.
And I'm
Okay.
going to leave it at that.
Is it set kind of modern or
Mhm.
okay?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
You've got another book coming out. Joseph Bridgman, book 4, Quantum Chain, is coming out on
Yeah. Yeah.
October 4th, I believe.
Yeah. Nick Jones contacted me about that a long time ago. Actually, Blackstone Audio, who's publishing it, contacted me and they were like, hey, so this British author would like you to narrate his books. They take place in England. Everybody's English. And I'm like, if you noticed, I'm not.
Right.
But I lived in England for 2 years. And I love it over there. Um, but you know, and I had a conversation with him about like, dude, I'm not going to try to like do a British accent for the main character for this book just because that's a lot, you know, and I'm going to be shifting from county to county. I mean, England is a smallish country, but you know, you drive 30 miles and there's a different word for bread. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, it's like the dialects are very, very different. And if you're really good at dialects, you can pin it down to the region, the city, the neighborhood, you know, all of that.
Right.
And they're very, very much defined. So me coming in trying to do some sort of generic British, and it's like, oh, is he in London? Oh, is he in the home counties? Oh, is he now in the Midlands? Well, you know, it's like doing, you know, generic, you know, Yorkshire, Northern, you know, kind of thing. It's like, unless you really, really know your business, that's a lot to ask of an audience
Right.
member. So he allowed me to kind of Americanize the main character in it. Um, and I was glad of that. You know, the conceit being, you know, he said, well, I don't know that, you know, anybody would buy, you know, an American living over there and not picking up the accent. I'm like, well, I lived over there and I didn't pick up the accent. I talk like I talk,
Right.
you know. And I've tried to like sort of soften that a bit so it's not so like, you know, Britain, California, Britain, you know, because
Yeah.
that's jarring in and of itself. But they're great, great. But that's just talking about the technique of it. The books themselves, great fun. All sorts of timey-wimey mystery stuff, but the stories have such a heart to them. Really good storytelling. You really feel for the main character, for Joe Bridgman, and great characters all around. The great, just terrific fun to read. So I'm very excited about the new one coming out.
When it says something about you, when he specifically requested you to do it, knowing full well.
I was very grateful about that. I truly was. And and bless him for allowing me to kind of sally forth without trying to do it. But I just said to him, mate, it's going to piss off a lot of your listeners if you got some yank trying to do some. I just thought better that they have one jarring thing than a jarring thing every page.
Right.
I don't know if it's the right decision ultimately, but whatever. And my initial thing was, no, you need a British narrator, and they were like, no, we would like you to do it. And I was like, oh, okay. But I have no problem saying no to a book if I don't feel I'm right for it.
Right.
So yeah, but it's great fun. So that's coming out soon. There is, without giving anything away, there's another Dennis Taylor in the pipe. There's another Jonathan Mayberry in the pipe.
Okay.
And there's a bunch of other stuff coming out soon. So yeah, been busy.
Well, that's awesome and exciting. Yeah, we'll definitely have to have you come back, and we'll do like a part 2 or something like that down the road. We'll
sure. Yeah, I'd be happy
to. Or
to.
something like that.
I'd be happy to. Absolutely.
Awesome. Yeah. Your Facebook /narrator Ray Porter on Facebook is your fan page. At
Ray Porter Audiobook Narrator, I believe, is what it actually is on Facebook.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
could be wrong.
Yeah, I pulled it up and it was like a /narrator Ray Porter.
I will defer to whatever you.
That's what I looked up. It's your page.
I will defer to whatever, but I think it's Ray Porter Audiobook Narrator. But if you can find me that way, then listen to this fellow because he knows more than I do.
Look them both up. Look them both up.
Look them both up.
At Ray __ Porter. I learned that today.
2 underscores. Yes. There's a lot of Ray Porters out there.
There are a lot of Ray Porters. And you're on Cameo. If people want to get a cameo with Ray Porter,
I have gotten to do cameos for people, and it is so much fun. I started doing cameos, obviously, because of Darkseid and Justice League. And then a lot of audiobook listeners have had me do cameos, and it's great. I've gotten to see some reactions, and it's been amazing. So, yes, I'm on Cameo.
That's a lot of fun. Definitely make sure you all
birthdays, bar mitzvahs, tell your friends.
It's cameo.com/darkseid SEID for those that don't really know what don't know their spelling. I know some people are like SID. No, SEID.
SEID, absolutely. Twitter, and I'm kind of on Instagram, not really. I'm not that good at it.
Me either. Yeah. I just post my stuff from TikTok, but we won't talk about TikTok.
I don't do TikTok. I mean, it's like, I'm too busy in here recording. I'm not going to like come up with some dance or try to drink a bottle of seltzer in one go. I don't have the bandwidth.
Eat a Tide Pod, something like that.
Yeah, eat a Tide Pod. Yeah, I just don't have the, I got no time.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for hanging out with us.
Hey, an absolute pleasure.
Fans, September 5th, we're going to be having author Tim Pratt's going to join us. He's a Hugo Award-winning author with multiple contributions to science fiction and fantasy. We're going to talk about his many works, including his new space opera trilogy. And I, of course, as I've said before, I love his Pathfinder Tales series. I think Ray Porter's done a Pathfinder Tales with James Sutter as well. September 19th, fellow audiobook narrator, author, actor Victor Bavine's going to be joining us. He did the he did the voice of Dristo Erden. He's done roles in Homicide, Law and Order, Star Trek Deep Space Nine. We're going to talk about all of that and his book, Certainty. So that's going to be September 19th. October 3rd, owner Steve Jackson Games. Steve Jackson's going to join us to talk about board games, role-playing games, Munchkin, Zombie Dice, and more. He's one of the biggest names in the tabletop gaming industry. That's going to be October 3rd. So join us for all of those. Be sure to follow, rate, review, do all of those things. They really do help us grow, and they put more eyes on our guests. So, for our amazing guest, Ray Porter, thank you all for listening to Epic Realms.